Okay, thank you everybody for joining us. We are going to get started with the sort of mid-morning session here in the climate justice stream. We have two presentations that sort of break up this entire hour, and we're gonna hopefully have some time at the end of the hour for interactive Q&A. I do wanna point out to people that we have both the chat and the Q&A panel in the EventMobi platform. The questions ideally would come in onto the questions side. If you have things that you want to talk to each other about in EventMobi, you can use that on the chat side. And then if you see questions that you like, you can vote for them and sort of move them up the list. And as the facilitator, that helps me out just to sort of sort through the questions that are coming in. We appreciate your time in joining us today, and we appreciate our presenters joining us as well. Today we have three folks coming at us, joining us from different parts of the state, Brenda, Neomy, and Kirsten. And the way the agenda is set up, we're going to start out with Neomy, and she's going to present sort of her perspectives on the importance of climate change and climate justice. Neomy lives in the Madison area. We came across her because she's part of some different leadership programs that are taking place in Dane County and around Madison, related to climate and the environment. And we learned from Neomy that she's actually started her own organization as well. So we're looking forward to hearing a little bit about that from her. So I will turn things over right away then to Neomy.
Thank you, Eric. I will screen share and start the presentation. Hi, so like Eric said, my name is Neomy. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the co-founder of In Pursuit of Sunshine. I'm also a junior at Madison West High School, and today I'm going to be presenting on my experience with youth movements and the relationship between climate justice and water justice and how that helped me start my own organization in 2018. So yeah, and like Eric said, I am from Madison, Wisconsin. So this is what my Madison, Wisconsin looks like. So I grew up here. I've lived here since I was 3 years old. So I've been here for quite a while. And I'm sure a lot of people know of Madison, have been to Madison, may even live in Madison. And if you have been in Madison, these are kind of some of the areas that I grew up with, kind of where going to the airport for trips and going up to the Capitol building for school. And there's a lot of community gardens in Madison as well. And I am fortunate enough to be a part of that as well. But over the course of the past 3 years, I have noticed that this is also what Madison looks like. So it has, we have a lot of problems with water quality, which is something that I didn't really know growing up. I really just saw the parts that I wanted to see or the parts that I grew up with. But I do know now that we do have we have PFs and high levels of PFs in our water in lower income communities and specifically Black and Brown communities, and eutrophication off of our lakes. And we also are, the town of Madison is going to be moving to City of Madison Water in the year 2022, and we will have F-35s moving into Madison in 2023. So there are a lot of water justice problems, and of course there's flooding everywhere as well. And what really makes them water justice issues and not just an environmental issue is that it really affects real people. It affects the people that live in Madison, and it affects just the whole communities that live there, and kind of divides up. As you can see, kind of the pathways of the roads dividing up the areas, you can also see that the problems that we face from lack of water justice and really do also divide up the city. So that is where my knowledge of climate justice comes in, is because I really did see the flooding that was happening, and this was happening to people that I knew. But this is also what Madison looks like. We have a lot of people trying to fight against the problems that we face with water, and against or for the Black Lives Matter movement, which is also intersectional for the water justice as well. And so my climate justice story starts with water justice, but I think a lot of people's climate justice stories start in different places. They might start with food security, or when you turn on your water, it might start there when you have problems, or finding a good place to live, and to live with your family. And so there are a lot of places, and I think that's what really creates the stories of climate justice and behind climate justice. And this is just a little bit about my climate justice story. But everybody's climate justice stories start in different places. So I guess at this point, you can kind of think about where does your climate justice start? Where does your story start? Because I think we're all very impacted by climate justice, and by the effects, or either the problems or the solutions, or both. And I think it's not just one thing, it could be multiple different things. So it's really an array of different problems and different solutions. And I think community problems really do need community solutions. So it's very intersectional, and there's a lot of solutions that are very similar. And so this is kind of a few different examples of where climate justice intersects. And of course, water justice is on there. And I assume this week as well, you'll hear a lot of stories about how water justice and water quality really affects people in Wisconsin and elsewhere. So this is really, in finding out this, and in finding out all of these different things, I really did think that it was important for me to start an organization, or to at least be a part of other organizations. So that kind of what prompted my organization starting. So this is our mission statement. We have a very short mission statement, which is, it is our responsibility to take care of our community. But we also have this much longer mission statement that kind of breaks down climate justice and what climate justice means to us. Because again, we have a definition of climate justice, but that might look different than other people's definitions, or your story around climate justice. So here's where my climate justice began. So in 2018, I had just started high school. So I was a freshman in high school, and I had met a really good friend of mine, and she had unfortunately just lost her house in a terrible flood. And I, if anybody remembers the floods in 2018 in Madison and around Madison, and just in Wisconsin in general, all of the rain that we had gotten, it was really a terrible summer for a lot of people. But also at that time, one of my family members was struggling with cancer. So that was what prompted our organization to begin. I had decided that I wanted to do more rain garden projects, and talk, if you don't know what rain gardens are, they reduce a lot of flooding naturally with plants. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So we really wanted to create, or work on solving, I guess, each other's problems, or at least being part of the solution to help. So she created an event around boosting morale for children with cancer that were living in the Ronald McDonald House Charities at the time in Madison. And I created projects for rain gardens. And I think that's really where it kind of clicked for me, because I think a lot of times climate change can seem very vast and very hard to be a part of. But I think when you bring it down to a local level, on really how is this affecting me and my community, or the people that live near me, my neighbors, the people who live in my city, how does it really affect us on a local level? Yes, it's about the statistics of climate change, and it's about other countries having problems, but it's also it's a very local problem as well. So just realizing that it's on such a local level with flooding. And yeah, so that was kind of how our organization got started. And we've been around since 2018. Our organization is In Pursuit of Sunshine, or IPOS for short. So in 2018, we made that promise that I would help her with this project and she would help me with her um, with her project. Sorry, and that is how we started to build our own community. And at this point, it's been 4 years, so we've kind of fulfilled that first promise. She created that event and I created that community garden and the rain gardens, and we're still continuing that mission. But we've also, as you can see from this picture, our teams have expanded so much. And so we are now allowing people who feel like they're struggling from not from racial justice and from food security. And these are problems that are being brought to our team. And so we're also working to help solve those problems and help create a community that can really have conversations about the problems that are happening and be very open about just all of the injustices and the climate injustices that we have. Yeah, in 2019 was kind of the year that we became an official organization. So that was very exciting for us, and our team expanded quite a bit. And in 2020, it sounds very strange, but it was our best year, probably because we had started our rain garden projects, we had started community gardens, and we had started our newsletter. And it was really a very it was a time when I feel like we had to be very educated with the elections coming up. And there was more flooding in Madison, of course, because of the summer and all of the rain. And so we began making our mission more about education as well. So now it's 2021, and it seems like it was just yesterday that it was 2018. But we're starting our rain gardens, and it's been a long process, I think, for some of our projects, but we're really happy with where we are, and we are always welcoming of new people. So if anybody has any, ever wants to be in a newsletter of ours or anything, we really do want people to join and to just be a part of our community. Okay, so rain gardens. Since this is a water justice presentation, I decided to pick a couple of our projects that we're working on currently and talk a little bit about water justice and why it's important in Madison and everywhere, I guess, but specifically for us on a local Madison and Dane County level. So rain gardens are made up of native plants. They help to filter water and they reduce runoff. It is part of a solution for flooding. What happens is the water that runs off of, because there's so much flooding, oftentimes from if there's a lack of trees, a lot of the runoff can kind of bring all of the nutrients down into the water. And then there's a lot of nutrition in the water, or a lot of nutrients in the water. And that can cause eutrophication, and that can cause a lot of other problems. And so rain gardens are a really easy solution. So our solution to this kind of problem, or one of our steps towards the solution for rain gardens, or solution for flooding, was to plant 30 rain gardens in Madison. And we're still working on that. And if you have a home that has had flooding, or a business that has had flooding, you can apply to have one of these rain gardens. And we would do an impact study and assess to make sure that this is a good, proper place to put a rain garden. And but this is something that I think anyone can do. You can put a rain garden in at any time. They really are very easy to create. And so I think that really it's a big issue. Flooding is a huge part of climate change, and it's a huge factor, but I think there's just very small solutions and very local solutions that you can kind of think about. And so we're excited to kind of have our solution and continue to work on this problem that we started our organization from. The next one is our newsletters. So we publish a newsletter every month, and our topics that we have covered so far are not necessarily something that we know about all of the time. We don't have a lot of information about, but we know that it's something that we want to learn more about. So we find people that we want to interview. Yeah, we just write their stories and we spread it out to our community. And our community is very, I think, benefits a lot because it grows so much because of our newsletters. So we've done food security, and this is our water justice newsletter where we kind of talk about the F-35s in Madison and the pipeline line 5 and flooding and pollution and a lot of different topics with water justice. And so, yes, we've also done food security, the Black Lives Matter movement, talking to organizers, home security, voter registration, mental health, and we are a little bit behind. I think we often, we have so many people to interview and there's a lot that we want to put in our newsletters. So we often run a little bit behind, but we do try to publish a newsletter every month. And that is really what has been the reason why we can grow our community so much. So it's one of our solutions. And also, we have a lot of projects, but again, they all very much intersect with each other. So our community gardens help a lot with food security in the area, and that is something that a lot of people in the community struggle with, just like they struggle with water justice. We also, like I was talking about, our newsletters that kind of intersect all in one way, and we try to bring it back to how this really impacts climate justice and climate change. And I think one of our missions for our newsletters and for all of our projects is making sure that because we know that climate change is not only in our future, but it's also in our present. And we know that it's going to get a lot worse if we don't act right now. And I think that's why youth want to act so quickly, is because it's so important for us. Because I think, you know, the people who can solve the problems are the people who are the closest. And I think as youth, we are pretty close to the problem because we see these problems happening and we know that they're going to get worse if we're not the ones that are actively advocating for solutions and advocating for our communities to, and I guess pressuring our elected officials to do better and to also promote the solutions that we have, because we're the ones that are the closest to the problem. But yeah, as I guess continuing on with our projects, we have done other projects like our Get Out to Vote campaigns. That first event, the Creativity for Children Patients. Mental health is a huge part of climate change and climate justice because it's very important. I think these problems and these crises, and especially with the pandemic now, they cause a lot of anxiety and stress. And I think already high school is pretty stressful. And I think this kind of adds to that. So mental health advocacy is a really important part and has always been kind of a huge part. And we didn't know that until we had somebody on our team who was struggling with mental health problems. So I think it really does kind of show that it's important to welcome people into our community because we realize how interconnected these problems are. Yes, and then here are a few organizations that we work with. We try to work with a lot of other organizations. And I think when Eric had first introduced me, he had mentioned some of these organizations as well, like 350 Madison or 350.org, which is the international organization. So they have a lot of hubs in different areas. Youth Climate Action Team is in Madison, but it's also in a lot of other parts of the country and in Wisconsin. Alliance for Climate Education is a national organization. Dane County Youth Environmentalist Committee is a very local organization, but they have very similar missions than us, but they also have a lot of other projects and wonderful projects that they're doing. And then Sierra Club, which I think a lot of people know about, which is a national organization. So those are just a few of the organizations that we have partnered with and worked with. We've worked with a lot of other organizations that aren't specifically climate justice. We've worked with racial justice organizations and home security, lots of different organizations, which I think is probably one of the best parts, I think, about my job specifically, is getting to talk with people and do presentations, and I guess just working with other organizations and learning about what they're passionate about, because I think everybody has something that they're passionate about and a story that they can tell. So I'm always happy to hear stories and see that passion that people have and bring. And so I guess to kind of close, I guess the question is kind of why is this important to youth? And I think I kind of said this before, and it's because we are so close to the problems. We face these problems now, but I think we know that this is going to get harder. And we're a lot of people like myself. I'm not, by myself. I'm not an independent yet. So I think that's kind of harder. And these problems will, with home security and food security and access to education. This is really important to me, and this is also very important, I think, to a lot of youth. And the idea that, we can't vote, but we can, our voices can still be heard in other ways. We can talk to our elected officials, and we can, we're close to these problems. So we have to kind of find solutions that make sense to the problems. And then the question, I think, is kind of what can you do? So I think you're already doing a lot just by coming here and having that education and hearing these presentations. I know that there's a lot of wonderful presentations, a lot of wonderful presenters, and today is only Monday, so there's a lot going on this week, and I'm really excited to see everyone who's presenting. And I think so I think it's education and going a step further and getting involved. And also just telling your story, like, where does your climate justice begin, and what solutions do you need in your community? And finally, here's my kind of contact information and our website if you are interested in learning more about our organization or being in our newsletters. We have a pretty new website up, so we don't have all of our projects up, but there is still a lot to learn, and there's a lot of information there. So yeah, and we are pretty active on Instagram, and we email back pretty quickly. So any questions, if you have any questions after this presentation, or you want to get more involved, please feel free to contact me. Yeah, and I guess my last question is, are there any questions?
Thank you, Neomy. Noemi, I got it wrong the first time, and I apologize for that, Noemi.
No problem.
We do have a question here, and it's a big question, and it's kind of maybe a complicated question, but we can list off lots of water issues, right? Like flooding, or the eutrophication you mentioned, the lakes around Madison getting green. How do those issues get translated into an issue of, or a matter of climate justice? Can you help just recap how those connections get made?
Yeah, definitely. I think that specifically taking the idea that you had said about eutrophication often, I think it's because it affects the water quality. And when we see that it affects the water quality, it's often hit harder with marginalized communities. So that's lower income communities and Black and Brown communities. And so I think it's just the quality of the water and where it's kind of connected. I don't know if that exactly answered your question, but I'm trying to think of an example with eutrophication. I think it's also just flooding. So I think it's where houses are placed as well. And so segregated communities are often, they might be at a lower altitude. So everything will just kind of come flooding in, and then you have to kind of pay the price of that. That's not to say that other communities aren't. It's just that I think, statistics will show, and also stories will show that marginalized communities are hit harder. Um, it's hard, there's a lot of areas, in Madison that have poor water quality, and it just happens also to be marginalized communities.
Yeah, and I think specifically of Madison and Lake Mendota, there's a whole community of people sort of on the north side of Madison, and they can't like go out. You don't just sort of say, well, let's just put in a swimming pool. If we don't think the water in the lake is clean enough to swim in, we'll just build a swimming pool. Swimming pools are super expensive. Not everybody can do that. And yet we watch the beach at Warner Park sort of go further and further downhill. Then the kids don't get access to water, right? So there's injustice in the outcomes for families, that some families sort of can buy their way into water, and some other families are sort of left with what's there. I think of another example from Madison. This is just an anecdote that I heard from someone that around the Oscar Mayer factory, right? You can picture how that looked 100 years ago, that around a factory, these were sort of working class, blue collar homes, people who probably worked at the factory. And the factory itself over time used a lot of water, right? The production of hot dogs and products that they made there was very water intensive. And it had its own water system, its own wells. So it was pumping water out of the system, using it in that manufacturing process. And then the factory closed, right? There was a decision made a few years ago to say, well, we're going to move to, I can't remember if they moved to Iowa or Mexico, but they just said goodbye to Madison. Well, okay, there's injustice there in terms of the outcomes, right? People lose their jobs and all that. But what people didn't expect is that by turning off the wells at the factory, the groundwater table started to rise. And so suddenly there was higher groundwater. And if you were in one of the houses near the factory, suddenly you had groundwater coming up into your basement. It was lower before because the factory was running, and now it's actually coming into your basement. And then you'd say, well, okay, I guess maybe that's the homeowner's challenge. But again, these tended to be smaller and low income homes. And so it was not by any sort of design that someone said this should happen, but the consequences for the community were that people who already struggle maybe to make rent or make the mortgage have this additional cost stacked on top of everything they're doing. And it had nothing to do with anything they did. It was just sort of imposed on them. And in terms of the climate change consequences, imagine that replicating out in other communities too. If Wisconsin does become a more wet state, we can expect the groundwater table to move up as a result. And the people who generally live at the lowest elevations or places that are close to groundwater, they're the ones that are going to feel those effects first. I'm going to take a look at the panel real quick, see if there's other questions. You mentioned the Instagram. Can you talk briefly about how community organizing is different for you and your colleagues, your fellow youth, sort of compare it to maybe the government way of doing things, and tell us how maybe even during pandemic, you all were able to pivot and keep projects going?
Yeah, definitely. Yes, so I think our Instagram is kind of used so that we can talk with people and talk with organizations and kind of more reach out casually. I think government is very, very different, that they don't have the same capacity because they have such, I think, not larger jobs, but they have a lot of administration or admin things to do. For us, we can kind of go not during COVID, but we can go kind of door to door and give flyers or get people involved in a community garden. We have that time to go door to door and give, talk to people about what they really want to see in a community garden. During COVID, I think we kind of reached out to a lot of local businesses, looking at their websites, emailing them and interviewing them. There was a lot of our newsletters kind of stepped in as our major project during the pandemic. We were able to interview organizations, businesses, and then from there we could ask them kind of our last question for an interview is, who else should we interview? And again, we kind of use the networks of other organizations as well. We ask them if they have someone that we should interview or we should just talk to. And there's a lot of projects that we saw getting started up because of COVID. I think people were tired of being stuck inside and feeling like they couldn't do anything. And especially with the protests coming up and over the summer, that was kind of how we battled that, was just by reaching out to people and kind of cold calling people and expanding our community. We did start a community garden during quarantine, which was harder, I think, because we didn't have the same amount of neighborhood input at the beginning. But if you kind of get one neighbor, you can kind of get another person and figure out how they communicate. So that's kind of how we were able to continue through the pandemic. And of course, webinars and online events like Water Week was how we kind of made it through.
Thank you. So just one more reminder, if someone's looking on Instagram, they're going to look for In Pursuit of.
Yeah, is there a way that I can know?
It's almost easier to say it out loud, make sure it's clear what they're searching for.
Yeah, it's In Pursuit of Sunshine, but there are underscores in between each word. So there's like a little underline under each word.
Okay, and we'll try to get that into the chat as well.
Between
thank you
each
very
word.
much, Neomy, for sharing your time with us and sharing your story. I really do appreciate you taking the time to join us. And you're going to be able to stick around until the end too?
Yep, I can, definitely. Thank
Great.
you so much.
So we might have some questions at the end that help stitch these two different presentations together.